Well, I've been inundated with questions that you'd like me to answer, so I've split everything into categories. So every time we do a Q&A session, it'll be themed. And the theme of this one is gathering. So gathering on your sewing machine, we're going to be gathering with shirring elastic and gathering with elastic. And then I've got a gathering method with a little bit of cord, which is more suitable for thicker fabrics. So a few different ways of actually gathering, so I hope this explains. So let's start off with just a gathering stitch on your sewing machine. So here we go. Now just use a straight stitch. I'm going to use a long stitch, but what I'm also going to do is to loosen my tension on the front of my machine here. And on my machine I'm going to take it down to about number 2. It's always worth having a bit of a play before you start sewing and just make sure that the gathers are as you want them to be. And then I'm going to sew my straight line. If this was your actual project, then you would have drawn or chalked your mark on there first of all, so you know you're sewing in exactly a straight line. And I'm leaving quite a long thread tail at the end because I'm going to pull that together shortly. Now I'm going to sew 2 rows of stitches. You could even sew 3 rows of stitches, and there's a reason for that. Well, there's a couple of reasons for it actually. These are 1/4 inch apart. First reason is you'll get a flatter gathering line if you have more than 1 row of stitches. So your gathers will sit flatter, so it's going to look better. The second reason is that if when you're pulling the threads to gather them, you happen to break one of them, then at least you've got another 1 or 2 rows of stitches to fall back on, so to speak. So there's my 2 rows. So on the one end I would take my top thread through to the bottom just by using a pin or something to pull that through. Out you come. And tie those 2 ends together. So that'll just stop the thread coming undone completely. Come here. Pins are useful things, aren't they, for more than just pinning. So double knot, and then I trim the ends back. And then the same with the second row here. So just find where the top thread comes down, pull it through, and tie those off. Now at the other end of your fabric, you're going to take the bottom thread. So pull away the ones at the top and just take the bottom. Now remember I loosened the tension. Basically a perfect tension on your fabric will have the top stitch and the bottom stitch both meeting right in the centre of the fabric, and that'll give you a stitch that looks the same on the top as it is on the bottom. That's perfect sewing. If I loosen the tension at the top, it's not going to pull the bottom thread into the centre of the fabric. It'll leave it straight. So I'll have more top thread looping underneath the fabric and the bottom thread is kept straight, and that's what we want because it's the bottom thread that we're going to pull. If you pull the top thread, it'll just pucker up. So grab hold of the 2 threads that you have and very gently just ease the threads, or ease the fabric along the threads. Don't pull too hard, or you will break them. Then we have to start all over again. So just keep gathering until you have the size of the fabric that you like, or the concentration of gathers, shall we call it, when they're as tight as you want them to be. Make sure they're even, so even when you've got your fabric to the length that you like, you can still kind of manipulate these and arrange them slightly so that they're all even. And this is the kind of gather that you'll find on tiered skirts. It's not a stretchy gather. But if you were to sew another piece of fabric over the top of that, you can make a really pretty tier or put a frill around the edge of your fabric. When you finish the gathering, just the same as you did at the start, pull the bottom threads through and then tie them off, and then you've got the perfect gather. If you're going to make your gathering by hand, then that's the same method, but obviously with one thread, but still sew 2 rows. So do a tiny running stitch, knot your threads at the end, pull them through, and gather them. But always 2 rows, because you get that nice professional flat finish. Shirring elastic. If you haven't seen shirring elastic before, this is the kind of thing that you can make with it. So the elastic around the top of this little skirt is shirring elastic. It could be a skirt, it could be a dress. You see a lot of summer dresses, maxi dresses. It could be a boob tube, or maybe even around the cuff or a sleeve of a garment. And this does have lots of stretch in it, so it's a very forgiving fit to a garment, if you like. So what you'll need for this is your actual shirring elastic, and this is what it looks like. So it comes on a spool, and it is available in lots of different colours. It will snap if you pull it hard enough, but it's basically a cotton thread wrapped around a very fine piece of fabric. And what you need to do with this is just to put it in the bobbin on the bottom of your machine, so not in the top. You'll need to hand wind this, because if you use your machine to wind this, then it's just going to stretch far too much. And you'll find if you do stretch the thread as you wrap it around the bobbin, when you let it go, it all kind of unwinds like a corkscrew really quickly. So just hold the thread on the side and start to wind. So don't pull it tight again, because it will just unravel. And we're just going to fill up the bobbin. Now, because you are winding by hand like this, it doesn't actually take very much to fill the bobbin up. So if you've got a larger project, maybe you're making a summer dress for yourself, then you're going to need a lot of elastic. If it's just a small project like a sleeve or maybe a child's dress, you might not need so much. But just be aware that you're going to run out of elastic very quickly. So I think that will be just about enough for what we're doing now. So let's snip this off and put it into the machine. So just like where your regular thread goes in the bottom of your machine, we'll take that one out. Just pull that thread through a little. I'm just going to cut the very first end off there where it's sticking out. And then drop the bobbin into your machine. Same if it's a front loading machine, so just thread in the same way that you would do normally, and bring the bobbin thread or the shirring elastic up to the top as usual. Right, so my tension is going to be normal. My stitch is going to be quite long. So I'm on 3.5mm on my machine. Before you start to sew the shirring, if you're going to put this into a garment, make sure you hem that first, because when your fabric's all gathered up, you're going to find it really difficult to hem. So if this is the top of a dress, fold the top over twice and then hem. And then if you're confident, you can just start sewing straight away. If you're not so confident, then draw lines again around about 1/4 inch apart, and then simply start to sew. And you can see the fabric gathering up already. When I get to the end, I'm not going to backstitch. I'm going to pull the thread out so that I've got enough again to tie in a knot. And then we'll go on to the second row. So that's gathered very nicely. It will carry on gathering more and more and more the more rows that I sew. And you'll find that it will gather more the closer together your rows of stitches are. So this is the second row. Now I'm pulling the first row, not tight, but just so that it's flat. Because if I start to sew with the fabric all creased up, there's a chance I can sew over the top of those pleats, and then it won't stretch. It won't look very good. So don't pull so hard that you're going to pull the fabric away from the needle. Just flatten it out gently. So that's the end of the second row. And again, enough to knot at the end. and then we just carry on. So you carry on sewing for as long as or as deep as you need the shirring elastic section of your garment to be. Again, pull that flat. The more lines you sew actually, the more it's not really visible if your lines aren't perfectly straight. Let's just do one more. And that's the kind of finish. So you can see that's gathered the whole piece of fabric. It shrunk down by around about a third. Now a couple of little tricks for you. If the fabric hasn't gathered quite as much as you want it to, then you can gently pull the shirring elastic and gather it slightly. Do be careful though, because if you do snap the shirring elastic, it's going to be very difficult to re-sew over one particular section. But before you try that, take a steam iron. Obviously, if that's going to be suitable for your fabric, don't use that on something like a nylon or a sheer fabric. But give it a blast of hot steam, and the hot steam will shrink the cotton that wraps around the elastic and pull it together even more. And then when you're finished and you're happy, pull the top thread through to the back again, just like we did when we were gathering by machine, and tie that in a knot at the back, and then you've got your elasticated fabric. Another little tip though, if you're sewing a top, so around the top of a dress for instance, if you sew the seam together first, then you can just keep sewing around and around and around and around in a coil, and then you don't get any kind of join where you put the two seams together at the side. Doesn't matter if you do, but that's just a thought, might make it a little bit easier. And then in elastic, if you're sewing elastic again at the top of a garment, or maybe you've got a pocket on a bag that you want to elasticate slightly, then this is a really simple method of sewing on your elastic on your sewing machine. So I'm using a 1/4 inch wide elastic here. Again, normally I would have folded the edge of my garment or project over a couple of times and hemmed this, but it's the technique of sewing in the elastic that I wanted to show you. So you can use a zigzag stitch, but a lot of sewing machines will have a stitch which is specifically for sewing in elastic. It's number 9 on my machine, and it's a zigzag, but it puts little stitches in between the points of the zigzag, so it stops the elastic pulling through. So start with your needle in the down position, so you may have to wind your hand wheel on your machine and just catch the elastic, and I'm just going to sew a few stitches. 2 reasons: one, to secure the end of the elastic, but the other one to make sure that my stitches aren't going over the sides of the elastic. So I don't want the points kind of going either side. I just want it to be the same width as the elastic. And then you're going to pull the elastic slightly taut, not too much, because you don't want to pull it away from the needle, and you still need to allow the fabric to go underneath the needle. And start to sew. Now, as I've got a little bit of fabric at the back now, I'm just going to hold on to it just to help it through. And again, don't pull. We're just flattening. So as I'm sewing again, I'm keeping the elastic slightly taut. It's a very quick method. Oh, and I am sewing on the wrong side of the fabric. So whatever the project is, I don't want to see this from the outside. Again, pull slightly. And I'm not pulling the fabric from the back again, I'm just easing it through. And there's the elastic from the back, so I've tried to keep that as evenly as I can, and that's what it's going to look like from the front. Now the final gathering technique I wanted to show you is something that is really quick, really simple, and if you've got a very heavy fabric that maybe elastic just isn't going to gather, or you certainly wouldn't be able to use shirring elastic on there, this is a good option for you. I'm going to take a length of, this is actually crochet thread, but it could be embroidery thread, it could be a fine cord, a piece of ribbon. It just gives me something strong that you can pull. And this is going to be laid down on top of my fabric. Again, as before, if you need to draw a line to exactly where that's going to go, then do so. And I'm just going to use a zigzag stitch. But I want it to be quite a narrow zigzag stitch. So I'm placing my cord right in the centre of the foot of my sewing machine. It doesn't matter what kind of sewing machine you have or what kind of foot you have. You'll normally have a little mark in the centre, or like a V shape at the front of your foot, so you can depict where the centre is. And I'm going to take the stitch width and the stitch length right down. And just sew a few stitches to see if that works. A little bit too narrow. Right, and then start to sew. We'll have that. There we go. That's better. Always have a practice first, but basically we need a zigzag stitch that's going to clear either side of my cord. So if you've got a wider piece of cord than I have, then you're going to need a wider stitch. But you could probably go up to about 1/4 inch. So if you've got a really thick piece of cord, you could use that. And if you are using cord and heavy fabrics, try using a top stitch thread or a buttonhole thread, because those are really strong threads actually in your sewing machine, just to make those stitches nice and strong. Then you're going to sew along the length of your cord as long as you need it. At the beginning here, you can pull the bottom thread through and tie that off with the cord as well, so that's not going to pull through. And then from the opposite side, you're going to pull your cord to gather your fabric. So again, this isn't a stretchy gather, but it's very simple to do. And it makes a nice, strong gather. And then you can attach this to the second part of your garment or whatever it is that you're actually making. So that's from the right side, so you just see a tiny zigzag stitch, and then on the wrong side you can see the cord threaded through. So I hope that's been of some help for you. Keep your questions coming in. You can message me underneath this video, so just write a comment down there with your questions if you like. You can join me on Facebook and you can post questions there if you wanted to. And don't forget, while you're there, to press that red subscribe button so you can get notified of all the new videos coming up. I'll see you next time.